of this prophecy brings us clearly to the time of the end. So, I've marked it out there, chapter 11 verse through to chapter 12 verse 4. And as I say, it's really all one single prophecy, because chapter 12, as we've just noted, begins with at that time. That is, at the time we've left off at the end of chapter 11. And secondly, it's clearly a time of the end prophecy because chapter 12 verse 2 brings us to judgment and resurrection. And furthermore, Jesus himself, speaking of the last days, actually makes reference to those early verses of Daniel chapter 12 in the Olivet prophecy. So we know that this is something that brings us really close to the end. All of this from Daniel 11 verse 2 right through to 12 verse 4, it's all the single one prophecy. Okay. It begins, and we're not going to go through this, all the verses, because there's too many verses to go through, but we'll just go through a sample of how to deal with this. Chapter 11 verse 2, Daniel is told that 3 more kings will appear in Persia, and then a 4th king who will be far richer than all the others. And when that 4th king has gained power by his wealth, he will stir up everyone against the kingdom of Greece. He'll want to overreach his power. Now, we do know that this prophecy was given in the 3rd year of the reign of Cyrus. And we know that because Daniel 10 verse 1 tells us. Remember I said when I started the reading, Daniel 10 verse 1, 3rd year of Cyrus. We know that, and we know that that is about 535 BC. Pick up any history book, it'll tell you. So Daniel 10 verse 1 tells us that the prophecy was given in the 3rd year of the reign of Cyrus, and Daniel 10 is a narrative introduction to chapters 11 and 12 as we've seen tonight. So 3 more kings will appear in Persia. And the 3 more kings after Cyrus, the next 3 referred to here in chapter 11 verse 2, were Cambyses, 529 to 522, Smerdis, very short period of time, and Darius. There were several Dariuses, I think, but that was another Darius from 521 to 485 BC. We know that. There's the 3 more kings. Now, what about the 4th, who would be richer than all the others and stir up everyone against the kingdom of Greece? Well, that 4th king was Xerxes. And he reigned from 486 to 465 BC, so for about 21 years there. And the reality was with Xerxes that he did have unusual wealth, which enabled him to establish vast, well-equipped armies. He was the great military king, one of the great military kings of Persia. And in 480 BC, he overreached, really. He invaded Greece, because Greece was a little upstart kingdom at the time in Macedonia, and he invaded Greece with a huge army and navy, but he was surprisingly and ignominiously defeated. The Greeks knocked him out. And he went back to Persia with his tail between his legs, and thus began the long and steady downfall of the Medo-Persian Empire. And it took a long time. It wasn't as though the Greeks sort of knocked him out and then took over. I mean, he invaded the Greeks. So when they beat him in battle, he wandered away, as I say, very much ashamed about the whole thing, went back to Persia and licked his wounds. And so we see the decline, the steady decline of the Medo-Persian Empire. And it took a long time for that empire to decline. But certainly after Xerxes' defeat in Greece in 480 BC, its superpower status was lost forever. It was in decline. And therefore, from Daniel chapter 11 verse 3, the prophecy just forgets about the Medes and the Persians, and it moves to the next superpower of relevance to the Jews in their homeland, which was, of course, the kingdom of Greece. The rise of Greece. And chapter 11 verse 3 says, "Then a mighty king will appear who will rule with great power and do as he pleases." And, of course, we are introduced to our old friend Alexander. Alexander the Great, who in a short period of 13 years basically conquered the world. The then known world, and even more of it. As I've indicated before, he even went as far as the northern reaches of India. He was truly, I think, the most amazing military genius in history. And you even that. You remember that, of course, back in Daniel 7, he's regarded as the leopard. The Greek Empire is the leopard. It moves so quickly, so fast. He was the original exponent of blitzkrieg. And he truly did as he pleased, including successfully invading Persia to avenge the wrongs of Xerxes in invading Greece 150 years earlier. He wasn't around then, but the Greeks had long memories, and he said, we'll take on Persia as well, and he did, and he defeated them, and that was it. The Persian Empire was completely gone, and he took over. And chapter 4 of Daniel 11 says, after he has appeared, Alexander, his empire will be broken up and parcelled out toward the four winds of heaven. It won't go to his descendants, nor will it have the power he exercised, because his empire will be uprooted and given to others. Now, he did have descendants. He did. He left 3 possible heirs. There was a half-brother of his called Philip, who was mentally deficient. So there would have been problems there anyway. But he had a legitimate son, and born after Alexander died. And there was also an illegitimate son. But predictably, now if you know anything about ancient history, you should know what I'm going to say next. What's predictable about ancient history? What happened to those 3 heirs?
Probably got murdered.
Of course they did. All 3 were quickly assassinated, and to put it in a mathematical formula, 3 minus 3 equals zip. So there's no one, none of his heirs can take it over. It's all good stuff. And it says it won't go to his descendants, but his empire will be uprooted and given to others. And we've already covered this in previous sessions. The kingdom was then divided among 4 of his generals. Seleucus, who took over the area of Syria and Mesopotamia in the far east. Ptolemy, who took over the south, Egypt and North Africa down there. Lysimachus, Thrace and Asia Minor, which was sort of to the north and east. And the home territory, the homeland Cassandra over Macedonia and Greece. Now these visions and insights into the empires of Persia and Greece are relevant because at some time each empire attempted to wipe out the Jews, or at least destroy Jewish customs and religious traditions. The Persian Empire during the reign of Xerxes through the plot of Haman, as recorded in the book of Esther. And the Grecian Empire during the reign of Antiochus Epiphanes, who we've also covered in previous sessions, where Antiochus set out to kill every Jew who didn't renounce their commitment to the one God and embrace Greek culture with its many gods, as prophesied in Daniel in several places. So all of this is relevant for these reasons. And after Alexander, though, the Jews in their homeland came into contact with only 2 of those 4 kingdoms. Only 2 of them. The Seleucids. And the Seleucid kings, because Seleucus, who was the first of them, he was one of the generals of Alexander. That's another thing they did in the old days. If you took over a country, you became a king and set up your own dynasty, right? That's what you did. So these 4 generals all became kings, self-proclaimed kings, set up their dynasties, and their children became kings, and so it went down. And the Seleucid dynasty lasted for quite a long time, as also did the Ptolemies, and that's the king of the south. And we get down to some interesting times. We're actually going to look next week a little bit where we even get down to Cleopatra and all that sort of stuff, and Mark Antony. The Bible talks about them, it does. It's all here in Daniel actually about what happened. Fascinating stuff. And Daniel 11 then proceeds to outline in amazing detail the next 200 years or so of the history of the interaction between the king of the south, who happens to be, and it's sort of a generic king of the south, whoever the ruling Ptolemy was at the time, all right? Whoever the ruling Ptolemy was, he was the king of the south, and whoever the ruling Seleucid king was, well, he was the king of the north. And the prophecy just continues in a continuous historic sense like this. And of course the Jews in their homeland were caught up in the middle. Right in the middle, the buffer zone. It's a bit like poor old Poland has always been caught between Russia and Germany. Alright? Second World War type stuff. Russia and Germany hate each other. Oh, they come up to a pact, and then they built that life out of Poland, and then, of course, the Germans take over and then the Russians come in. It was the same sort of thing. King of the North, King of the South, that sort of thing, with the Holy Land being the buffer zone between the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. And it went on like that for a couple of 100 years. So back to the prophecy, verse 5. The king of the south will become strong But one of his commanders, not one of the King of the South's commanders, but one of Alexander's commanders. This is where we've got to be careful with the use of pronouns in this. And there's going to be a little exercise in pronoun use later on in this chapter, I can tell you. The King of the South will become strong, but one of his commanders will become even stronger than he and will rule his own kingdom with great power. And after some years they will become allies. The daughter of the King of the South, you don't think just because they were offshoots of Alexander's kingdom that they were all good mates. They weren't. Once you set up separate kingdoms, there's another rule of ancient history. You sort of never get on with anyone if you can. You're always trying to knock them off.